All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are deconstructing an entire universe of tension and contradiction that is literally packed into just 64 intensely concentrated words. I mean, we're talking about less text than your average quick email, yet this source material establishes a desperate physical and psychological reality that absolutely crips you from the very first syllable. We're going to put this tiny, terrifying text under a microscope to understand exactly how it builds such a massive sense of claustrophobia, just using a handful of incredibly specific details. Let's get into it.
Take a second to read this terrifying text. Notice how there's no gentle preamble here, no backstory to ease us in. We are dropped right into the pitch black dark, in media res, experiencing the protagonist's immediate disorientation right alongside them. That opening phrase, "what should be tried next?" Well, that implies a whole history of failure, doesn't it? It tells us we're joining a frantic, desperate brainstorming session happening in real time right inside this person's mind. Zooming out for a macro view of the trap, we're hit with the sheer tragic irony of the situation. We've got a trapped boy, a toxic green gas representing an overwhelming sensory decay, and the literal sparks of an impossible friction. It perfectly captures the core conflict of our explainer: immense, staggering human willpower violently colliding with the absolute, unyielding physics of the resilient hardware keeping him bound. When you strip away all that raw emotion, what you're left with is a racing, desperate checklist. These are the fixed, unyielding physical parameters our character is up against. Basically, an equation with 4 variables. You have an urgent, desperate need for freedom. You've got a toxic environment actively filling the lungs. There's this near superhuman mechanical effort to rub solid metal. And finally, the fatal flaw. The chains are brand new and completely uncorroded. These parameters, they simply do not budge. Let's focus on the environment for a second. The author uses such precise, visceral language here, specifically the word enveloping. To envelop means to surround and cover completely. So the true horror of this box isn't just the physical walls around him. This single word transforms a mere bad smell into a heavy, tactile, physical barrier that's literally forcing its way inside the protagonist with every single breath. It just completely maximizes the claustrophobia. Now, here is where things get really fascinating. At the heart of this story is a violent contradiction, and it forces us to impartially weigh the evidence. We have 2 very different possibilities: a long-term physical trial or a sudden, complete psychological break. Based on the sources, we really have to ask ourselves, has this prisoner been slowly grinding away solid steel chains for decades, or have they only been trapped for a few hours and their mind has already completely snapped? Let's break down the evidence for both sides. First up, the long-term timeline. If we are going to believe the narrator is actually wearing away solid steel just by rubbing smooth links together in the dark, we have to grasp the agonizing epoch of time required for kinetic friction to actually work. On a microscopic level, you're catching tiny peaks and valleys of metal against each other. To cause structural failure using smooth metal on smooth metal, that requires millions of repetitive motions. It implies a passage of time so vast, it almost defies human comprehension. Which brings us to a brutal juxtaposition. Think about it. If enough time passed to mechanically wear down that metal, the damp, decomposing environment guarantees that chemical rust would be an absolute certainty. But the narrator explicitly notes the chains are too new and lack corrosion. Here's the thing. In a damp environment, flash rust forms in a matter of days, sometimes even hours. If the biological need for sleep forces the captive to stop rubbing for even a little while, oxidation is going to catch up. The chemistry simply doesn't allow for long-term mechanical wear without rust. Biologically speaking, there's also a highly finite timeline for that rat carcass. The putrefaction stage that produces that intense, lung-burning cadaverine gas simply cannot last forever. Once a carcass desiccates or dries out, that intense smell dissipates. Plus, if the captive had been in there long term, human olfactory fatigue, basically nose blindness, would set in. The brain tunes out background odors. So the fact that this smell is at the absolute forefront of their consciousness, that's a massive clue. It strongly argues this is a novel, very recent horror. Well, unless the box acts as a sealed tomb causing saponification. See, if the environment is cold, oxygen depleted, and extremely damp, body fats can undergo a process turning them into a hard, waxy soap, often called grave wax. This wild chemical reaction effectively halts normal decay, meaning that putrid enveloping state could theoretically be locked in for years, like some grotesque time capsule, making that horrific smell a permanent fixture of their reality. So, since the physical reality is riddled with these intense contradictions, we have to shift gears and look at the internal state of the narrator's mind. Notice the profound linguistic fracturing in the text. The narrator spells carcasses like the Eurasian mountain range Caucasus and link with a C. Now, you might think these are just simple typos, right? But they're actually a fascinating window into how the brain is actively processing this trauma. Our sources suggest these misspellings might not be typos at all. Instead, they could be evidence of an amygdala hijack. This is an acute trauma response where sudden panic forces the brain's logic center to just completely shut down. Blood flow gets rerouted directly to the primal fear center, and the brain reverts to raw phonetic processing. They're just sounding the words out in a desperate fight or flight state. This heavily supports the idea of a sudden, mind-breaking confinement rather than years of imprisonment. And that acute panic would also trigger something called tachypsychia. It's a neurological distortion of time perception induced by severe stress. Basically, during severe trauma, your brain records memories in incredibly high definition. Because it's capturing so much dense data, your brain interprets the event as having taken a massive amount of time. So a few frantic hours of suffocating confinement are recorded as a long, tedious eternity. The feeling of the metal being nearly worn away could simply be an illusion, a desperate psychological survival mechanism making seconds feel like hours. But weighing all the evidence impartially, we have to ask ourselves a huge question. Are we looking at the manic cycling of a snapped mind? Or is the methodical phrasing of what should be tried next actually proof of a starving brain expertly conserving its depleted calories? Think about it. A panicked mind thrashes and screams. A methodical mind uses the scientific method, prioritizing the complex logic required for escape over strict spelling accuracy simply because they're operating under profound physical exhaustion. It's brilliant because the text gives us just enough evidence to strongly argue both sides. But pulling back the microscope from all these intense scientific debates reveals the ultimate, truly disorienting twist. The narrative takes a sudden, sharp turn. With one final, desperate surge of strength, the nearly worn-away links finally snap. The suffocating pressure instantly vanishes, and 11-year-old Leo bolts upright in his own bed, totally drenched in sweat. That's right, the chains, the rat, and the pitch-black box, they were all the terrifying manifestations of a little boy's vivid nightmare. Yet, as Leo stares at the moonlit shadows of his cramped bedroom, shadows that look hauntingly like discarded chains, with the phantom scent of dust lingering in the air, a devastating realization hits. His own room is the box. The physical trap was just a dream, sure, but that feeling of confinement, that's his waking reality. And so, we have to leave you with this final, haunting question about the true nature of captivity. If your reality feels exactly like a box, does the mind eventually find a darker path to freedom? Think about that the next time you feel trapped. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.